Attention! This channel provides original historical analysis based on sources and research. We do not simply recount events, we analyze their causes and consequences, explaining them through original narration, editing, and visual diagrams. A list of sources is included in the description. Enjoy watching. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're covering a real historical event, one that changed the course of the largest naval campaign in human history. Not a decision made in a command room, not a strategy developed over months by senior officers. A decision made by a 24-year-old lieutenant from Minnesota with no combat experience and 11 days on the job. What he found, and what he did about it, directly determined whether Britain survived 1943. By the winter of 1943, the North Atlantic had become the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth. Not because of storms, though those were brutal. Not because of geography, though that played its role. It was dangerous because German submarines had turned it into a systematic killing ground, and the Allies had not yet found an answer. The numbers tell the story clearly. In March 1943 alone, German U-boats sank 108 Allied merchant vessels, 627,000 tons of cargo sent to the ocean floor in a single month. Fuel, food, ammunition, tanks, everything Britain needed to survive, and everything the planned Allied offensive in Europe required to exist. Admiral Dönitz commanded the German submarine arm with precision. By early 1943, he had over 400 operational U-boats. His tactical doctrine, the Wolfpack system, had been refined over 3 years of combat. A patrol line of 15 to 20 submarines would stretch across a convoy route. When one boat made contact, it radioed headquarters. Dönitz vectored every available sub toward the target. Then the pack attacked. Convoy HX-229 and Convoy SC-122, running parallel courses across the Atlantic in mid-March 1943, together lost 21 merchant ships in 72 hours. 43 escort vessels between them could not stop it. The escort commanders were experienced professionals. Their doctrine was sound by existing standards. It simply wasn't enough against coordinated attacks by 15 submarines hitting simultaneously from multiple directions. On the Allied side, the response had been methodical and largely ineffective. Escort numbers were increased. U-boats adapted by waiting for gaps. Direction-finding equipment allowed escorts to track submarine radio transmissions. The submarines dove and waited, then surfaced when the escorts moved on. Bletchley Park had broken the German naval enigma cipher. Dönitz changed his codes. Each Allied measure produced some results. None produced enough. The core of the problem had a name: the Mid-Atlantic Gap. A stretch of ocean roughly 600 miles wide, centered below the southern tip of Greenland, that lay beyond the range of land-based patrol aircraft. Allied planes could cover the eastern and western edges, but the middle, roughly 10 million square miles of open ocean, was unpatrolled from the air. Every convoy crossing the Atlantic passed through it. Dönitz knew the exact boundaries. Admiral Sir Max Horton told Churchill's War Cabinet in February 1943 that without a solution to the gap, Britain faced the loss of sufficient shipping capacity to maintain minimum imports by year's end. He didn't use the word starvation in the formal minutes. His meaning was clear. American Admiral Ernest King calculated that merchant ship losses would exceed new construction capacity by September if the trend continued. The solution everyone recognized was long-range maritime patrol aircraft capable of covering the gap. The technology existed in limited form. The B-24 Liberator, adapted with extra fuel tanks and stripped of bomb bay equipment, had the theoretical range to reach the center of the gap from Newfoundland or Iceland. Anti-Submarine Command had deployed several squadrons of these modified aircraft to Gander Field by late 1942. The problem was results. Between November 1942 and March 1943, these squadrons flew 412 patrols over the gap. They reported 37 U-boat contacts. They executed 17 attacks. Confirmed kills? 0. The aircraft existed. The gap was being patrolled. The submarines kept sinking ships at record rates. Something fundamental was wrong with the approach, and no one in the chain of command had identified what it was. At Gander Field in February 1943, a new crew arrived. Their pilot had 200 hours of total flight time. Their radar operator had received 2 weeks of training on equipment he had never used in combat. Their navigator had washed out of standard training due to chronic air sickness and been reassigned because anti-submarine command needed bodies. He was 24 years old. His name was Second Lieutenant Harry J. Kane. Harry Kane was born in 1919 in Duluth, Minnesota. He finished high school, attended 1 year of community college, and left to work at his father's hardware store. No engineering background, no military family connections, no particular distinction in his pre-war life that would suggest what was coming. His total aviation experience before enlisting consisted of 3 rides in a barnstormer's biplane at a county fair. He enlisted in January 1942, following Pearl Harbor. The Army Air Forces assigned him to navigation training, the course that best matched his aptitude for mathematics and spatial reasoning. He completed most of the curriculum successfully. Then the program introduced high-altitude training. Kane's chronic inner ear condition produced incapacitating air sickness above 15,000 feet. The instructors recommended discharge as medically unsuitable for flight duties. Kane requested a transfer instead. Anti-submarine maritime patrol operated at low altitude, typically below 1,000 feet, well beneath the threshold that triggered his condition. The request was approved without enthusiasm. Anti-submarine command needed qualified personnel, and Kane met the minimum criteria. He arrived at Gander Field in February 1943. It was not an assignment that officers with better options chose. His crew had been assembled in similar fashion. Pilot James Doherty had 200 hours of total flight time, most of it in training aircraft on domestic routes. Bombardier Michael Torres had trained on stationary ground targets in Nevada, conditions that matched almost nothing about maritime attack operations. Radar operator Donald Pierce had attended a 2-week course on newly deployed surface search radar and had never used the equipment in actual combat before arriving at Gander. Squadron Commander Major William Sanford reviewed the crew assignments without comment. He had received green crews before. He expected them to spend their first weeks learning and their first months becoming marginally useful. Kane's crew fit the pattern exactly. Their first 3 patrols confirmed it. March 8th, 11 hours over the gap, 0 contacts. Pierce reported 3 radar returns. All 3 turned out to be whitecaps misread as submarines. On March 10th, Torres spotted what appeared to be a surfaced U-boat, and Doherty began an attack approach. Kane checked the identification manual. It was a whale. On March 12th, Pierce acquired what looked like a solid radar contact 8 miles out. The crew went to battle stations. They broke through cloud cover at 500 feet. Below them, a Portuguese fishing trawler, 3 patrols, 0 contribution to the mission. Major Sanford called Kane into his office after the 3rd patrol. The conversation was brief and direct. Kane's crew had flown 3 patrols, burned a significant quantity of aviation fuel, and contributed nothing. Their spotting record was the worst in the squadron. Sanford didn't suggest discharge. He stated the obvious. Performance needed to improve. Kane didn't argue. The statistics supported Sanford's assessment entirely. What Kane didn't say, and what Sanford didn't ask about, was something Kane had noticed during that 3rd patrol. While circling the Portuguese fishing trawler, reviewing why Pierce's radar had flagged it, Kane had observed something about the return signal pattern. The difference in characteristics between a wooden-hulled vessel and what a steel submarine would produce. A small technical observation. But Kane had the habit of following small observations until they led somewhere. He spent that night in the radar workshop reviewing signal data. By morning, he had the beginning of an idea. Within 48 hours, that idea became a tactical proposal. Within 72 hours, it was rejected by his commanding officer. Within the week, it saved the first of many ships. But on the night of March 12, 1943, Harry Kane was simply a young man with no credentials and a pattern he couldn't stop thinking about. At 3 in the morning on March 14th, Kane spread 37 patrol reports across a workbench in the radar workshop. He had requested access to the squadron's complete contact records under the pretext of a navigation accuracy review. Sergeant Pierce, who had been following Kane's thinking since the fishing trawler incident, was with him. They worked by flashlight. Drawing attention to what they were doing would have produced questions Kane wasn't ready to answer. For each reported radar contact, Kane cross-referenced 3 variables: wave height at the time of contact, sea state classification, and whether the operator had treated the return as a probable submarine or dismissed it as clutter. The correlation that emerged was not subtle. It was, once visible, obvious. Every dismissed contact, every report classified as a false alarm, had occurred during sea states with wave heights above 6 feet. This was not coincidence. Standard anti-submarine doctrine instructed radar operators to reduce receiver sensitivity in rough seas. The reasoning was straightforward. Heavy swells produced strong radar returns that cluttered the display. By filtering out low-level returns, operators could see through the noise. The manual described this as improving detection reliability. It was written by experienced specialists with 2 years of operational data behind it. Kane saw the flaw. A U-boat running on the surface in 6-foot seas produced a radar return that fell precisely within the range the filtering procedure was designed to eliminate. The conning tower of a Type 6C submarine, measuring approximately 14 feet above the waterline, generated a surface return of similar amplitude to a moderate ocean wave. Standard filtering wasn't improving detection reliability. It was erasing the target from the display while the operator was actively looking for it. He brought the analysis to Pierce. Working through the technical parameters together, they identified a distinguishing characteristic that hadn't been documented anywhere in training materials. A submarine conning tower, being solid steel, reflected radar pulses differently than a water surface. The return had a sharper leading edge, a faster rise time on the pulse return. Ocean waves built their radar signature gradually. Steel reflected instantaneously. Without filtering, watching carefully for that specific pulse characteristic, it was detectable. Pierce studied the data for 2 hours. His assessment was careful. He believed he could learn to distinguish between the 2 signatures in operational conditions. He couldn't guarantee it. He estimated the skill would require practice and wouldn't be reliable beyond 15 miles in the heaviest seas. But at ranges between 8 and 20 miles, in sea states up to Beaufort Scale 6, he believed the distinction was real and learnable. Kane prepared a tactical memorandum covering 2 subjects. The first was the radar discovery. Stop gain reduction filtering in heavy seas, and train operators to identify the specific pulse characteristics of steel hull returns. The second subject was the attack profile. If the filtering procedure had been causing crews to miss contacts at detection range, standard doctrine had a parallel problem at the strike end. The setup sequence between visual acquisition and weapon release took 2 full minutes. A Type 6C submarine required between 60 and 90 seconds to complete a crash dive from surface to 60 feet, the minimum depth at which a standard aerial depth charge would not reach it. 2-minute setup against a 90-second dive meant the weapon arrived after the target had escaped. Standard procedure had been generating near misses on submarines that were already safe when the depth charges detonated. Kane's proposed fix was direct. Cut setup time to 30 seconds, increase approach speed, release weapons at 400 feet instead of the standard minimum of 600. The manual's 600-foot minimum existed because British Coastal Command had lost 4 aircraft learning that lesson. Kane's memorandum acknowledged this. His conclusion was unambiguous. The current altitude restriction was preventing effective attacks. The depth charges were reaching the right coordinates, but detonating after the submarines had descended below their effective radius. He submitted the memorandum to Major Sanford on March 15, 1943. He didn't expect it to be approved. He submitted it because the data was accurate, the logic was sound, and he saw no alternative to presenting it honestly. Major Sanford read 3 pages before summoning Kane to his office. The meeting took place that same afternoon. Sanford's response was immediate. The radar interpretation proposal had some technical merit, he acknowledged. The attack profile modification did not. Flying depth charge attacks at 400 feet, below the established safety minimum, wasn't innovative tactics. It was a violation of operational restrictions that existed because men had died establishing them. The 600-foot minimum had been written in those exact terms because the data behind it came from wreckage. Kane didn't retreat. He acknowledged the safety history. He argued that the tactical situation in March 1943 had changed the relevant calculation. 0 confirmed kills in 412 patrols meant the current approach wasn't working. If the choice was between a theoretical risk at 400 feet and a documented certainty of 0 effectiveness at 600, the data supported accepting the theoretical risk. Sanford rejected this framing. The meeting ended. The following day, Sanford did something unexpected. He called a squadron-wide briefing and invited Kane to present his analysis to the assembled crews. The intention, Kane understood, was collective dismissal rather than collective consideration. Sanford wanted the proposal addressed once, thoroughly, in front of every experienced officer in the squadron, so it would not resurface. Kane presented the radar analysis first. The response was mixed. Several radar operators nodded at Pierce's description of pulse rise time differences. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Hughes, an anti-submarine warfare inspector visiting from command headquarters, with 16 U-boat attacks and 2 confirmed kills, stated that the radar interpretation had merit. He spoke carefully and with the authority of actual combat experience. Then Kane presented the attack profile modifications. The room changed. The squadron operations officer raised the blast radius problem immediately. Another officer argued that Kane was proposing to discard doctrine built on 2 years of operational data, in favor of a procedure developed by a lieutenant with 11 days of combat experience. Hughes then delivered the assessment that effectively closed the formal debate. The attack profile Kane was proposing wasn't tactics, it was suicide. Those minimum altitude restrictions existed because crews had died learning them. Kane was proposing to repeat mistakes that British Coastal Command had already paid for. His assessment was delivered without hostility. It was the informed judgment of an experienced combat officer, and it carried the full weight of that experience. Sanford prepared to formally end the discussion. Kane made one final request, not for approval of the modified attack profile, only for authorization to demonstrate the radar interpretation method on the following day's patrol. Standard attack minimums would be maintained. The only variable tested would be Pierce's ability to distinguish submarine contacts from wave scatter without gain filtering. Hughes intervened before Sanford could refuse. He recommended allowing the single demonstration, 1 patrol, 1 variable. If Pierce couldn't show reliable contact discrimination under operational conditions, the discussion would end permanently. Sanford agreed. The briefing dispersed. Most crews avoided Kane afterward. One officer made a point of passing him in the corridor with a single comment. He hoped Kane was right, because if he wasn't, he had just wasted everyone's time. Kane returned to the radar workshop that evening and worked with Pierce until 2 in the morning, reviewing contact signatures, memorizing pulse characteristics, preparing for a single patrol that would determine whether anyone ever listened to him again. March 17, 1943. Kane's crew manned their B-24 Liberator at 0800. No modified attack procedures. Standard altitude minimums. The only authorized deviation from doctrine was Pierce operating his radar without gain reduction filtering, watching for the pulse rise time signature they had identified in the workshop. The squadron expected them to return with nothing. The sea state that morning was Beaufort Scale 5, wave heights between 6 and 8 feet, exactly the conditions under which every previous crew had dismissed contacts as clutter. At 10:47, approximately 500 miles southeast of Cape Race, Newfoundland, Pierce reported a contact. Bearing 270, range 11 miles. Under standard procedure, the contact would have been dismissed. Pierce held it on the display and watched the pulse signature. Sharp leading edge. Fast rise time. Confidence 70%. Submarine. Doherty banked toward the bearing. They descended to the authorized minimum of 600 feet. Cloud cover broke at 500. Below them, the conning tower of a Type 6C submarine running westward. The lookouts spotted the B-24 simultaneously. The crash dive began. Doherty pushed the throttles forward. The standard 2-minute setup sequence ran its course. Torres released 4 depth charges at 600 feet. The detonations produced 4 columns of water 60 feet high. When Doherty circled back, oil was spreading across the surface. Wooden debris, a life jacket, probable kill. The first confirmed contact the squadron had acquired in weeks. Sanford met them on the tarmac. Navy surface assets confirmed the debris. Probable kill later upgraded to confirmed. Sanford authorized 1 additional patrol with the modified attack profile. 1 test. 1 opportunity. March 18, 0920. Pierce acquired a second contact at 23 miles. Confidence 90%. Doherty dropped the aircraft to 400 feet while still 15 miles out, approaching through broken cloud cover. At 6 miles, Torres confirmed visual, a U-boat on the surface running north. The lookouts spotted them at 2 miles. The alarm sounded. Men cleared the conning tower. Ballast tanks began flooding. Doherty held course at 400 feet and 260 knots. The conning tower was still breaking the surface when Torres released 4 depth charges. The B-24 surged upward as 2 tons of weight left the aircraft. The detonations came 4 seconds later. At 450 feet, 150 feet below the authorized minimum, the aircraft shuddered through the blast wave. Metal stressed. Pierce was thrown against his console. The aircraft held. Below them, the submarine's stern rose completely vertical before sliding backward into the water. Confirmed kill. Later that same day, at 13:55, Pierce acquired a 3rd contact. The U-boat spotted them at 3 miles and completed its crash dive in 62 seconds, 18 seconds faster than Kane's attack profile required. The depth charges detonated over empty water. The submarine escaped. Kane recorded the timing data and adjusted the approach parameters that evening. March 19th, 3rd patrol in 3 days. Pierce contacted a U-boat at 19 miles. Doherty descended to 350 feet. Approach speed 280 knots. The lookouts didn't spot the B-24 until it was a mile and a half out. Insufficient time. The depth charges bracketed the conning tower perfectly at the moment of submergence. The explosion lifted the submarine's stern completely free of the water. Both sections sank within 30 seconds. 3 kills in 3 days. March 20th brought the 4th contact, a U-boat running at full surface speed toward a convoy position. Pierce detected it at 27 miles. The pursuit lasted 40 minutes across the gap. The U-boat captain saw them coming and began his dive immediately. But Kane had recalculated the timing intervals based on the previous day's data. Doherty released at the precise moment the conning tower submerged. The depth charges detonated at 30 feet, the optimum depth for a submarine still descending through 40. The pressure hull ruptured. A large air bubble broke the surface, followed by fuel oil and structural debris. 4 kills in 4 days. March 23rd. Convoy route HX-230. 8 hours into a patrol that had produced nothing. Pierce's eyes were burning from continuous radar watch. He nearly dismissed the contact. Clutter was heavy, his own confidence only 60%. Kane overruled standard procedure. Treat it as confirmed. Execute attack. The U-boat was running between weather fronts, using cloud cover for concealment. It never detected the approaching B-24. The depth charges detonated directly beneath the conning tower. Survivors appeared in the water. 7 men from a crew of 46. Doherty circled and dropped a life raft. Navy destroyers were notified. 4 survivors were recovered 6 hours later. Among them was the submarine's executive officer. His interrogation report, declassified in 1973, contained a precise description of the attack. No warning. Aircraft appearing from cloud cover at extreme low altitude and speed. Depth charges detonating before the submarine reached 30 meters. Against such tactics, he stated, there were none. 5 U-boats in 6 days. Admiral Dönitz reviewed the loss reports from the central North Atlantic on March 26th and 27th. 5 Type 6C submarines destroyed in 6 days, all by aircraft, all with minimal or no warning, all in an area his command had considered protected by the limitations of Allied aviation. The tactical assumption that had anchored Wolfpack doctrine in the mid-Atlantic gap was no longer valid. On March 28, 1943, Dönitz issued Emergency Directive 227. U-boats operating in the mid-Atlantic gap were ordered to remain submerged during daylight hours, surfacing only at night for battery charging and ventilation. The directive was not a temporary adjustment. It was a fundamental restructuring of how German submarines could operate in the region. A submerged Type 515 on electric motors made approximately 4 knots. A surface convoy moved at 8 to 10. A submerged U-boat couldn't chase a convoy, couldn't hold a patrol line position, and couldn't coordinate effectively with other submarines. The Wolfpack system required surface mobility. Directive 227 eliminated it. The documented results followed a clear trajectory. British Admiralty records show merchant ship losses in the mid-Atlantic gap declined 43% in April 1943 compared to March. By May, they had dropped 67% from the March peak. The operational crisis that had threatened Britain's supply lines through the winter broke in the spring. The precise moment of the break corresponded directly with the adoption of Kane's tactical procedures across anti-submarine command. In June 1943, Anti-Submarine Command formally adopted the modified tactics as standard operating procedure for all maritime patrol aircraft. Kane's radar interpretation method became required training for every radar operator in the Atlantic theater. The low-altitude attack profile was designated the Kane approach in official documentation, noted as a procedural update rather than a doctrinal shift. Between March and August 1943, aircraft using Kane's procedures destroyed 47 U-boats. Dönitz withdrew his main submarine force from the North Atlantic in May 1943. Kane flew 73 additional anti-submarine patrols after March 1943. His crew destroyed 3 more U-boats, bringing their confirmed total to 8. The highest kill count recorded by any single aircraft crew in the Battle of the Atlantic. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross in June 1943. Major Sanford pinned the medal personally and stated, without qualification, that he had been wrong and Kane had been right, and that he was grateful Kane had not accepted the refusal. Naval Historical Center analysis conducted after the war estimated that tactics derived from Kane's March 1943 procedures shortened the Battle of the Atlantic by 4 to 6 months, preserved between 800 and 1,200 merchant vessels from destruction, and saved approximately 60,000 Allied lives. These are statistical estimates with significant uncertainty. They are the best available approximation of a counterfactual, what the loss curve would have looked like if the March 1943 tactical shift had not occurred. Harry Kane returned to Duluth after the war. He reopened his father's hardware store. He declined interviews, declined book offers, and in 1998 declined a request from a documentary production company assembling a comprehensive account of the Battle of the Atlantic. His stated reason was consistent across every contact. He had been doing his job. Nothing special about it. The tactics worked because the data supported them. Anyone looking at the same data would have reached the same conclusions. The record suggests this is not accurate. 412 patrols were flown before Kane arrived at Gander Field. The same radar equipment was operating on all of them. The same contact data was available. No one else identified the filtering problem. No one else proposed the modified attack profile. No one else sat in a workshop at 3 a.m, cross-referencing 37 patrol reports until the pattern became visible. Kane died in 2009 at the age of 90. His obituary in the Duluth News-Tribune ran 6 paragraphs and noted that he had served in the Second World War. Modern anti-submarine warfare aircraft continue to employ attack doctrine that traces directly to the principles he demonstrated in March 1943. The immediate prosecution standard, engaging a submarine the moment it is detected before it can submerge, is codified NATO procedure. Its operational logic was proven over 6 days in the North Atlantic by a 24-year-old with no credentials and 11 days of combat experience. That's the story of Harry Kane and the 6 days that changed the Battle of the Atlantic. A hardware store clerk from Minnesota looked at the same data everyone else had access to and saw something different. He proposed it, was rejected, demonstrated it anyway, and the results spoke for themselves. History records many battles won by superior numbers or superior technology. This one was won by a sergeant and a lieutenant working by flashlight at 3 a.m. Thank you for watching. If this kind of evidence-based military history is what you come here for, subscribe. There's more where this came from.